50-cent public transport fares, $1,000 off power bills, cheaper car registration, and a leg up for first home buyers. 4 months out from the state election, the Queensland government's budget is full of treats and big on spending.
Now that you've spent some time with the budget, I'm sure you can all appreciate why I've been so excited about this budget.
This budget is about doing what matters for Queensland. It's also a plan to help Queenslanders through the challenges they currently face.
The government is still expecting a surplus of around $560 million this financial year, but that is forecast to become a $3 billion deficit by the next.
This budget is not about buying votes. Why do you have $3.7 billion worth of cost of living measures that expire not long after Queenslanders actually cast their vote?
Because of the pressure that is on Queenslanders today. We know, particularly because of the impact of interest rate rises, Queenslanders are doing it tough.
They're just casting beads and trinkets before the winds, basically, trying to gather voters as best they can.
John Black is a former Labor senator and now works as an election analyst. He says after nearly a decade in government, Labor are facing a nearly 10% swing against them at the October state election, which could leave them in a similar position to 2012, when they won just 7 seats.
People want to change. They regard it as being unhealthy if a government has been in for too long, and you can't really blame them.
One of the reasons budget incentives could fail to win votes is that the opposition Liberal National Party, led by David Crisafulli, has already committed to honouring them.
If things are in the budget and they're underway and they're costed, that's not something I'm going to stand in the way of.
Look, it's quite extraordinary indeed. I'd call it an Australian first for an opposition leader to say something like that. I mean, we actually fund them. The taxpayers of Queensland fund our opposition to put up a robust alternative point of view, and clearly at the moment they're not doing that.
Former Premier Campbell Newman is critical of the Liberal National strategy.
But this small target strategy is what they're pursuing, and it's very timid, and it's not telling Queenslanders too much about what they'll do in government.
But the Shadow Treasurer says that's not the case.
We've already released a range of policies around return to work for women, solar for renters. We've had a number of our policies taken by the Labor Party.
Mr Newman, who is now a member of the Libertarian Party, was in charge the last time the Liberal Nationals were in power. He went from winning a huge majority in 2012 to being thrown out of office just 3 years later.
If there was a mistake, it was doing too much too quickly and, frankly, scaring people.
Liar, liar, pants on fire!
Campbell Newman sacked a lot of public servants. It's pure and simple. And that was an extremely unpopular act. So I think the coalition is still running scared of being too controversial. They're desperately frightened of being seen as a party that's going to cut the public service because it's a very strong political group.
For 9 years, the LNP have been in a lather to distance themselves from their time in government with me, and it hasn't worked in the last sort of 8.5 years, and sadly it's not going to work now because the thing about it is that David Crisafulli was in the Newman cabinet.
Local politics aside, economists say what's in the Queensland budget matters for the rest of the country.
This Queensland budget is probably one of the biggest ever cash splashes into households we've ever seen. And it comes at just the wrong time economically. State governments don't bear the political opprobrium of higher interest rates if they go and spend big, but the federal government does. And so in that context, I would have thought the federal government would be quite alarmed at this level of cash handouts by the Queensland government today.
Did you have discussions with your federal colleagues about whether this budget could be inflationary?
No. The assessment's done by Queensland Treasury.
While the state government says its budget is not inflationary and its cost of living measures will help bring down the consumer price index, economist Warren Hogan says that's not actually addressing the problem.
The reality is all they do is reduce measured inflation, but by putting money into people's pockets, which will presumably be spent and add to demand in the economy, it will actually put upward pressure on inflation and potentially on interest rates.
Di Johnson from the Griffith University Business School disagrees.
Because it's for an essential item and we don't see it, it never lands in anybody's account or in anyone's hand, it's unlikely then to be spent or reallocated from other disposable income for something that is non-essential.
In any case, she says with private investment down, state government spending is important to stimulate the economy.
It certainly has been a change of narrative from inflation to avoiding a recession. There's been a focus on cost of living to get people through the next year, as well as some of the longer term cost of living measures in terms of home builds and health care.
With Labor well behind in the polls, experts say the result in October is likely to be the same, whatever the reaction to the budget. And while that's bad news for Premier Miles, it may be good news for Prime Minister Albanese.
The Queensland State Labor Party's become lead in the saddlebags for the Federal Labor Party here in Queensland. So if they lose here, then the Labor Party no longer has to, at the federal level, defend the performance of the State Labor Party, which is getting increasingly difficult to do, let's face it.